1. I'm female, was 18 or 19 at the time, and working as a receptionist in the offices of an electronics company in Ontario. The building where I worked was 2 stories. The first floor where my desk was consisted of my reception room, the lunch room, and some meeting rooms. All the other employees, around 20 of them, worked in cubicles upstairs. As a receptionist, part of my job was to receive and sign for all deliveries. Typically, I would be interacting with the same delivery guys every day. But then one company put a new guy on our route. I wasn't too alarmed with him at first. I was pretty friendly with everyone. Would have some small talk about how their days were and such. This new guy would only want to talk about me though, how I liked my job, if I was happy that day, etc. Wasn't too bad. But then the small talk stopped, and he started with the compliments. "Nayaya, you are so beautiful." I guess I didn't mind, but this wasn't something I was used to hearing. What weirded me out is that that's all he would say, sometimes repeating himself 2 or 3 times. He began to stay much longer than necessary at the office, even sometimes popping in when he wouldn't have a delivery. He would compliment me and then sigh loudly and lean on my desk when I wouldn't respond. After one delivery, when he was leaning on my desk, I looked up and he was staring at me, smiling. Getting frustrated, I asked if I could help him. "Can I sit?" he asked, and pointed behind my desk. I asked him what he meant. "I want to sit with you and watch you work." Before I could respond, he began to walk around my desk, and was really invading my personal space. Thankfully, at that moment, someone began walking down the stairs beside my desk, and the delivery guy grabbed his paperwork and left. For a few days, everything was normal, and his creep level went down a lot. Now, usually I would drive one of my parents' cars to work. In our parking lot, we would have a bunch of cars in it, none of them with any identifiable features. The only time I would ever be near my car was when I was getting to work or leaving. This particular day, I was dropped off at work, so my car wasn't there. Delivery guy rushes in at his usual time, looking worried. He sees me and there is obviously relief. Before I can say anything, he blurts out, "Nayaya, where's your car? I was scared I wouldn't see you today." I stammered that I had gotten dropped off, freaked out that he knew which car was mine, and then the questions started coming. "Is it broken? Who dropped you off? Do you have a boyfriend?" He started to get a little upset, asking these questions in quick succession. I didn't answer, and quickly signed the papers he had in front of me. I didn't look at him, and he eventually left. I made a comment to my boss that day that the delivery guy had made me pretty uncomfortable. Just mentioned that some of the things he would say were a little strange. I don't know if she called and asked for the drivers to be switched, but I was really glad when I never saw him again. 2. So I'll start with landscape background so you can better understand this story. My boyfriend and I live in a little house right in the middle of all the businesses in our town. Our backyard is facing a sort of alley, and our front yard is facing the main road. There is a parking lot on one side and a strip mall type building with about 5 or so businesses in it. One summer night, me, boyfriend, and his cousin are all sitting in the backyard, having a fire and a few drinks, when this random older man wanders in our yard and asks if he could join. We didn't have a fence at the time, so we were kinda used to people wandering in trying to join our fun. Most times we just tell them it's a closed party, and they will leave without a problem. Sometimes they won't leave, but those are whole other stories. But this guy mentions he owns a computer store next door, so, boyfriend being the neighborly type, tells him he can sit and offers him a beer. Couldn't hurt to know a local business owner, right? Well, about 5 to 10 minutes into him being there, he reaches in his pocket and pulls out some pills and says they're ecstasy, and asks if we want some. We tell him, "No thanks, buddy, but go hard." He then starts very persistently trying to push these pills on me, "Oh, have some fun," he keeps saying. So this pisses off boyfriend and he tells him to get lost. In not so many nice words. Then after that I see him every day between noon and 2 like clockwork, walking past my house to the liquor store. He always has his little dog with him, and stops at my front yard to let his dog do his business. I think he does this on purpose, to drive my dogs nuts and get them barking, because there's like 1,000 other spots for his dog to go. Anyway, fast forward about a year. I'm home alone waiting for boyfriend to get home from work. Being a cautious young lady, I always lock my doors when I'm home alone. So it's like 9:30 or 10 and I hear screeching tires outside and see headlights kinda shining through the cracks of my curtains. Then I hear yelling. So now I run outside to see what's going on, and his boyfriend and his cousin. They caught creepy computer guy about 2 feet away, facing my living room window where I was watching TV, trying to peek in at me. Ugh, just retelling the story gives me the creeps. Imagine if I forgot to lock the doors or fell asleep on the couch with my curtains open. I'm not sure exactly what he was up to, but it couldn't have been any good if he was creeping late at night. Now he walks clear across the street to get his beer. He won't even face our house. I know this because I stare him down every time, and sometimes I'll open my curtain fast to try catch him in the act myself. Ugh, freaky. But now boyfriend got a security camera, so I'll update if we ever catch that creeper. Or any other creeper. 3. Although it is not my first time struggling with someone with malintent, this is my first time posting, so bear with me. A bit of background. I am a very small person, both in size and in personality. I am a 5'2" meek female with a proclivity for staring at the ground as she walks, and assuming the best in people when I really should be running the opposite direction. In short, I am an easy target for people like the man I am about to describe. I live about a 6-hour train ride from the college I currently attend. Fortunately, the train tickets are very cheap, so I'm able to visit home rather frequently. My mother had just dropped me off at this train station in order for me to take my first train back to school. I had already bought my ticket, and was there a bit early, so I decided to sit down in the foyer of the train station and use the Wi-Fi to watch some podcasts. I'm a very anxious person when it comes to being on time for trains, so I kept frequently looking at the departure board to watch for my train. After at least a half hour, I finally noticed that my train wasn't going to the stop I needed to go to. The tracks had needed maintenance, and I had forgotten to check the train website before I planned my return trip. Having no idea how to return to school, I called my mom, told her the problem. She said that she would return in about an hour due to traffic problems. No big deal. I would just sit there quietly and wait. Except he decided to sit next to me. He was a young man, probably in his late 20s, stylishly dressed and groomed. He looked entirely harmless. I ignored him and continued to watch my podcast. A few moments later, I hear a slight mumbling in his direction and feel a light tap on my shoulders. Pulling my earbuds out, I turned and see that the stylish man was trying to instigate a conversation by asking what I was watching. As mentioned above, I saw the best in the stranger and answered his questions about the podcast I was listening to. And we soon devolved into casual banter, but as the conversation progressed, I became more and more anxious. He started asking more personal questions like my name, my social media accounts, where I went to school, my age. I lied on every question, and specifically, when I said I was 17, I'm 19, I meant to deter him from venturing into the creepy territory of flirting by saying I was underage. Unfortunately, this did nothing, rather it seemed to encourage him. He complimented my appearance, mentioned how we should hang out, tried to give me his number. All these stereotypical creeper statements. I faked answering my phone, claiming my mother had called me and was almost here, and that I was to wait for her outside the station. I got up, said goodbye and left. I decided that since my mother was in fact not actually outside, that I would grab myself a snack at the Starbucks, go to the bathroom and then go outside to find some other place to hole up in. I got in line at the Starbucks, and when I got up front, I hear him call out to me. My heart drops in my chest, and he starts talking about how it was funny we kept running into each other, and that it must be destiny that we were to meet. I avoided eye contact, purchased my snack, and bolted out of the store to the bathroom. I do my business quickly and move to leave when I see him standing outside. He hadn't seen me, so I whirl back around and hide in a stall. After a couple minutes I leave, because the line was getting long, and I see him walk into the male bathroom, adjacent to the female one. I take my chance and run outside as far away from him as I can, while still trying to stay surrounded by people and stay safe. Fortunately, it seemed like I had lost him. I stayed outside and ate my sandwich for another 20 minutes, and then my mom showed up and I left, a little shaken, but safe. So, creepy stylish man at the train station, let's never ever meet again. Thank you. 4. This happened just this past weekend, somewhere between Temecula and Rainbow, California, and the whole incident took about 10 minutes. Long story short, driving back home early afternoon from Palm Springs on what would be a 2-hour drive. Earlier that day, me and a male friend were out hiking on Mount Jacinto. I was tired, so I fell asleep on the first hour drive home. This happened around 2:30 p.m. when we stopped for gas somewhere between Murrieta or Rainbow, California. The place was well populated, and even had a Target down the road and was not far away from a freeway exit. While my friend was pumping gas, this teen, about aged 17 to 19, came up to my friend asking for a ride, even said he'd pay. I was just waking up from my nap, so by the time I was fully awake, I saw this teen already outside my passenger side door, and my friend agreed to give the kid a lift. I gave my friend the silent "what the fuck dude" look, as they both got in the car but kept quiet as not to stir anything. I wasn't able to get a good look at this teen, but from my observation he was a white kid, dark brown or black hair, possibly 17 to 19, 21 being the oldest. He wore all black, possibly a beanie, had a backpack and an older model LG phone or similar. He smelled strongly of weed and some other musk. It looked like an emo kid to me. The moment creepy kid got into the car, he went all crazy and weird. Tried to sell us drugs and weed. Was eyeing the Beats headphone my friend was wearing, attempting a trade for drugs. Tried to convince my friend to do a porn flick, said there was good money in it. Kept telling my friend he can do a casting call for porn, that they should shoot some videos, and even gave bogus website on where to get bitches. He spoke like a gangster wannabe, and to be honest, I barely understood what he was saying. He also tried to ask for money, which means he lied about having money for a ride in the first place. He mumbled to himself a lot, laughing at nothing, to which I assume he was really high off of his rockers. Creepy teen also told my friend the car was trash, since all of her camping gear was in the back seat. His mood would jump from super excited to super quiet and broody. I was quiet to near silent this whole time, and obviously scared. What I did not know was that he could see my facial expressions, which was mostly about to cry, from the passenger side view mirror. The kid noticed this and asked me in a serious tone, "Why are you acting weird?" and went really quiet from that point. My friend tried to distract him a lot with small talk, while I scanned the road for a possible escape plan. Every time we asked the kid where he should be dropped off, as we originally agreed to drop him a few streets down, the creepy teen's tone changed, and he says, "Keep driving," then would switch back into pimp happy mode. I finally and quietly signaled my friend to drive onto a crowded exit, where there was a diner and gas station. At least there would be witnesses in case this goes south bad. Thank heavens for rush hour traffic. Lied we were doing a store stop because creepy teen noticed we exited. Then once we parked, told him nicely and calmly he needs to go. Took a while to convince him to get out. Clearly, creepy kid didn't like me. I was scared out of my mind. My friend's car was this old clunker stick shift. It tends to die or sputter, and the gears sometimes get stuck. So it took us a good 10 to 15 seconds to get back out of the parking lot. The creepy teen gave me a long stare down. I can tell he was pissed at me, though he seems to have liked my friend. By the time we pulled out, I can see he was calling someone on his phone. After we left and drove back to the freeway, that's when I broke down and asked my friend why the hell he did such a stupid, reckless thing, as he was the most paranoid person I know when it comes to strangers. Friend told me that the teen originally approached him, saying his mom either forgot to pick him up and he just needs a ride a few blocks down. Was almost close to tears too. Spoke normal, although desperate. When my friend said no, the teen motioned that he will ask for my permission, and went straight for me. I was still napping. This creep was determined to get into our car. My friend panicked, and felt cornered as the creepy teen was about to go to my side of the passenger car. So he decided to play along and do what the kid wants. My friend doesn't do well with confrontations, and in his panicked state of mind made a huge mistake. He at least admitted he fucked up big time. I pointed out the kid could have easily lured us somewhere. We could have been jumped or gotten us carjacked. And we are very lucky. Hopefully the kid was only a high and crazy runaway rather than a criminal. This is a harsh lesson to my friend about the dangers of picking up hitchhikers on the road. I also told my friend if he had money and a working cell, he could have just taken the bus or called anyone for a ride from the gas station. Later that night, I spoke to my cousin who is familiar with the area. He told me that place has a huge transient and homelessness problem, and is known for a lot of drug dens, mostly meth and heroin. Since that kid, if he was homeless, had a working mobile phone, it's possible he was a drug dealer, and was luring us to his accomplices to get jumped and carjacked. I guess we really were lucky. I have a few more camping and road trips planned throughout the year. I have to admit the experience rattled me bad, and I had a few nightmares since. I was a near victim once of a road assault, so this brought back a lot of bad memories. I just bought some pepper spray yesterday, and will carefully plan our route for the next trip to be safe and travel with more people. Also, we'll keep an eye on my clueless friend to make sure he doesn't pick up strange hitchhikers. Edit. As of this afternoon, my friend's car got broken into and was stolen. It took the police about 2 hours before they found the car abandoned in a Chinese restaurant. The most expensive thing that was taken in the car was his Beats headphones. 5. I was driving back to my college from my family's house after Thanksgiving break. I was traveling through a rural area in the Midwest, and I suddenly had the urge to pee badly. I was reading all the road signs I came across to see if there was a nearby town that I could stop at to find a gas station or something to use the restrooms. Unfortunately, the nearest town was 30-ish miles away, and I had to pee so badly. It was unbearable. I finally made the decision to get off at the next exit that I found, even though they don't lead to any towns. Shortly after I pulled off on the next exit, I came across a gravel road. I thought this was perfect, because I didn't want to get in trouble for exposing myself in front of anybody. It was a very private road. Just so you're all aware, I'm a female. It is very difficult for females to pee on the side of the road. I thought the best course of action would be to take my empty McDonald's cup and pee into that. I did just that, inside of my car, just in case anyone drove down the lonely road. I had finished my business and dumped the cup. I did not litter, only dumped the contents into the grass on the side of the road. I was starting my car and getting ready to turn my car around, back the way I came, when I saw a bright red car speeding down the road I was on. It startled me, but they drove right on past. I thought to myself, must be the locals out messing around. I started to drive off and I saw a dingy, rusted red pickup truck coming down the road after the car. They too drove past me. As they passed, though, I saw 2 male passengers who were staring straight at me. This freaked me out, but I told myself, all the more reason to get a move on. I still kept my eye on the pickup truck, though, and I saw them turning around, coming straight at me. This freaked me out so much I decided the best course of action would be to drive in their direction, continuing on the gravel road, as opposed to turning around, giving them opportunity to chase after me. I drove right by them again and saw that they were grinning at me. I was so scared I hit the gas, which on gravel road doesn't do much good. I finally got a grip on the road and headed along the gravel road. I looked in my rearview mirror, and they were following me again. I was freaked out. My hands were shaking, my foot was flooring the accelerator, and I reached for my phone. Now, I'm not the person to call 911 in just any situation. In fact, I was scared to call 911 because I was afraid I was just being paranoid. But as I looked in my rearview mirror again and saw them gaining on me, I called the police. When I called the police, the operator picked up and I explained to her what was happening. During this phone call, the men in the pickup truck were so close that I couldn't see their front tires. I was sliding all around the gravel road, trying to stay on the phone with the operator. She was giving me directions to the nearest town several miles away. They followed me the entire way there, all the way until I reached the police station. I saw them turn around very quickly because they knew I was out of their reach. I definitely learned my lesson from this, and I think from now on I'll stick to peeing in public restrooms. So, creepy man in the pickup truck, let's not meet again. 6. I'm in my 20s now, and unfortunately for me, have had a ton of creepy encounters. Probably the worst is this guy from high school who developed a crush on me. I'll call him Mark, and use different names for other people. Tons of people in my town know this story, and I am going to try to avoid giving away a lot of hints, because honestly, he still creeps me out, and this whole situation makes me uneasy. Mark was the same age as me, and had been held back a year, so I met him when I was a sophomore, and he was a freshman. I want to start out by saying Mark wasn't a bad-looking guy. He wasn't even socially awkward, and was a talented singer and musician. Despite him not having your typical something's off vibe, something was definitely off. I was pretty popular, and had some anger issues back in the day, so I brushed off Mark without even a thought about him. But everyone was uneasy around him. This included teachers and parents of other students. I had to deal with Mark because we were both in theatre. For sake of length, I will skip the endless strange things he did, and focus on what really put me off. He started telling everyone, myself included, that he had a crush on me barely a day after knowing me. He used to try to hang out with my friends and I constantly. He started doing weird things, like asking people where I was when I was absent, or not at rehearsal because my role didn't require it. If you're in a show, you can go to all the rehearsals even if you're not rehearsing on stage that day. And he started going to every rehearsal. He would just stare at me, and soon he got to the point of staying after much longer than required. Perhaps that would have been less strange if when he turned 16 and had a truck, he didn't turn it in a parking spot facing the theatre exit and wait for me to come out, always offering rides. By my junior year, the amount of times he would approach me and other people about how great I was getting less annoying and more disturbing. Being as I had a reputation of being tough, I basically just cursed him out and became exceptionally rude. which really only made him try more. Something to note about me is I am a very picky eater, and people who have known me for years can't keep up with what I do eat and what I hate. But Mark started buying me food and giving it to me, and it would always be these particular things that there was no way he should have known, unless he just watched me constantly. He started trying to give me money too, and I always told him to get away from me and would threaten him in one way or another. I noticed at rehearsals that money ended up in my backpack. The same amount he was always trying to give me, so it obviously was him. Winter started to roll around, and I was just creeped out. Everyone basically said he was the creepiest dude ever, and how I hadn't been completely freaking out before now was beyond them. I was very close with 3 guys. 2 were brothers, Jason and Mike, and my best friend Toby. Jason and Mike went to church twice a week, and announced to myself and some mutual friends that Mark had been kicked out of the youth group for inappropriate advances on girls there, apparently of all ages. It was around this time Mark just started following me, sitting across from me in rooms, at lunch, in the theatre. Being rude hadn't worked, being neutral hadn't worked, so I was just acting like he didn't exist at this point. It was hard, considering he started following us to dinner, after shows, and sitting at other tables next to us in restaurants. Here's where it gets bad. And I didn't even realize this was as potentially bad as it could have been until I was an adult. After rehearsal, Jason and Mike headed home in Jason's car, and I got in Toby's car. They all lived in the same community, and there was a park and a lake there, and we decided to go walk around. Apparently, Mark decided following us wasn't out of the question, and as we got to the parking lot, he did too. Night security told him flat out they knew he didn't live there, and to leave. Knowing me, because I was friends with many people who lived there. Only later did Mark tell us the night security asked him to leave, and he said he was with us. Jason, Mike, Toby, and I just walked around throwing rocks into the lake and talking, and Mark followed us. Being that it was cold, he literally took it upon himself to try and put his coat on me, and he insisted as I refused. And finally I just gave in. Mistake. Jason and Mike got into Jason's car because they were over Mark being creepy and said we needed to get out of there. Mark tried to leave his coat with me, but I didn't want anything to do with anything of his. Toby insisted he take the jacket and tell him to get lost, as everyone knew we were best friends, and he was over 6'4". I said I could take care of it. Second mistake. I took it off and handed it to him through the window of his truck, and he said in a dead serious voice, "I'm going to put this in my shrine to you." I remember I huffed angrily, but didn't say anything, and as I went to walk back to my friends, his eyes went dead and he said so blankly, "You know, you're the type of girl that makes guys like me bring guns to school." That was it for me. I excused myself nicely without being too nice, and got into Toby's car. He could tell something happened and asked what. When I repeated what I had been told, he instantly waved Jason back to his car, who had gotten out to come ask me why we weren't following them to his house. Once Jason was back in his car, Toby called him and told him what happened, and said not to go anywhere until Mark left. After about 5 minutes he did. We all went to Jason's house, and the 3 of them, including Jason and Mike's parents, said this had gone on long enough, and that was a threat, and I needed to tell someone, but I refused, saying he was just trying to scare me. Luckily for me, Jason and Mike's mom knew my mom very well, and after Toby and I left so he could drive me home, she called my mom and told her what happened. Toby decided to spill the beans the second he saw my parents, saying if I wouldn't tell them he would. My mother just heard the same story of this dude mentioning bringing a gun to school over me, from 2 different people. She called her friend who was a cop, and she went to the school the next day. What exactly happened to Mark I don't know. All my mother, our cop friend, and the administration at our school did say was that it was taken care of, and he was no longer allowed to be within 100 feet of me. After this, my senior year was filled with him staring at me, but never coming up to me. But throughout this year and the entire year after his comment to me, people I barely knew would approach me saying, Mark said weird stuff, like wanting to marry me, and even creepier, that he had a shrine to me. I like to believe that there was never a shrine, and he was just being weird. But everyone in my life swears they believe this shrine existed. I hate to think what would have happened had I not been with Toby, Jason, and Mike. If Jason and Mike's mom didn't tell my mom, and Toby also told her. I was originally mad that they were going to adults about it, but now realize that there is a chance that comment was more of a threat. Every now and then I wonder what would have happened if no one told. If I hadn't obviously looked scared, and Toby picked up on it. Could this guy have shot up our school, killed me, my friends, and innocent people? I like to think this was all a bunch of talk from a weird guy. But so often people do end up acting on their insane ramblings. Toby and I are still best friends, and here and then mention it. And I can never stop thanking him for involving Jason and Mike's parents, as well as my parents. 7. A few months ago, I was visiting a friend in South London, and my car was parked a few streets away. I was walking past the train station, and my attention was focused on my phone as I was replying to a text message. This is not something I would usually do, as this area is prone to theft, but it was important to reply. Suddenly, this disheveled-looking man has stood directly in my path and put his hand over my phone to get my attention. Before I could react to this, he started asking me for money so that he could get a taxi. I apologized because I couldn't offer any money. I never carry cash, only cards. He kept telling me he was fresh out of prison and knows the type of person I am, but I kept being polite and apologizing, but he wasn't listening to me at all. He started forcing his hands down my jacket pockets, and suddenly my mind just switched, and I started yelling at him and pushing him away from me. This made him even more crazy as he started grabbing my waist, trying to get to my trouser pockets. The area was crowded with people watching us, but luckily for me, 2 men stepped in and got this crazy man away from me, just as he pushed me back, and I tripped over my own heels and fell flat on my arse. We screamed a few insults at each other before the man walked off, disappearing out of my sight. The altercation must have only lasted a few minutes, but it felt longer. I felt so overwhelmed by anger and upset that I had to try very hard not to cry. I wasn't going to let myself cry over the actions of this horrible man. I made my way to my car and composed myself so that I could set off on my journey home. I didn't realize I was going to have any more trouble. I was driving down the road but had to stop for all the traffic that had built up in front of me. The vehicle in front of me was a large van, so it was completely blocking my view of the road. And I had no idea why cars further down the road were all sounding their car horns. So anyway, the van in front of me decides to drive around into the other lane, and I see that all the commotion was being caused by that same man that was harassing me 15 minutes prior. He was in front of me walking forward, and I drove slowly behind, just praying that he wouldn't turn around and cause problems with me. But he came to a stop and just stood there motionless. I stopped behind him, and I had nowhere to go. The other lane was busy and I didn't want to get this man's attention. But the traffic behind me started horning the crap out of their cars, and the man turned around, thinking I was horning the shit out of my car, and ran to my driver's side window. It was cracked down a few inches, as I was smoking a cigarette to calm my nerves. He was swearing and trying to spit at me through the gap. He kept trying to grab at me through the window, so I stubbed my cigarette on his hands to get him to stop. It worked as he jumped back, and I quickly took off now that the road ahead of me was clear. After I had driven down a few streets, I called 999 police and reported that a lunatic was causing trouble in the road. The officer took a description over the phone and told me a few people have called them about this situation. The entire drive home I kept imagining the argument over and over again, and I was so angry at myself for not punching that guy in the face. I just hope that in future I would be able to defend and stand up for myself against creeps like that. Has anything like this happened to anyone else listening to this? 8. This was about 9 or 10 years ago, when The Nightmare Before Christmas in 3D came out in theaters. I was about 12 at the time, and was one of those kids who was obsessed with the movie. I had explained to my parents why it was necessary that I see this movie in 3D, so we decided to go out to Dublin, a city my dad worked in, that's about an hour away from where I lived. And we go visit my dad's workplace then for lunch and the movie. Now, since I was an edgy preteen, I explained to my parents that I needed to sit by myself. They compromised, and said they would sit in the row behind me, so they can at least keep an eye on me. The theater made us go through what seemed like an hour of previews before the actual movie started. But that was okay, because halfway into the previews I needed to go to the bathroom. I turned around to tell my mom and she offered to go with me. I got mad and said I can go by myself. Then she pulled out my cell phone from her purse. This was around the time of flip phones, and I never really cared to have a cell phone, so I always left it lying around, and told me that if something happens to call her. I rolled my eyes and said okay and left for the bathroom. While walking to the bathroom, I felt the presence of this guy walking behind me, but he was walking uncomfortably close. I could hear him breathing out of his mouth. I get to the bathroom and open the door, and surprise, surprise, the bathroom was filled with other women and girls. I turn around and see the guy had sat on a bench and started staring at the floor. He was tall and lanky with long, greasy blonde hair. I turned back and went into the bathroom. There was a line in the bathroom, so I had spent a good 5 minutes just waiting to go. Finally, my turn to go came. Afterwards, I washed my hands, and my mom called me asking if I was okay. I explained to her the long line and that I'll be back soon, and hung up. I got out of the bathroom, and the guy was still on the bench. As I walked past him, he got up and started walking behind me again. I had my phone gripped in my hand, and I know what you're thinking, but no, I wasn't planning on calling my mom. I thought I was a badass, and was planning on throwing my phone at him, and then proceeding to kick his ass. My dad had spent most of my childhood teaching me how to fight and defend myself in case something like this happens. I got in the theater and sat back in my seat, and the guy sat in the same row, a few seats down. The movie had finally started, and I couldn't even enjoy it because I felt the cold stare coming from this guy. The theater was somewhat empty, so this guy could have sat wherever he wanted, but he chose to sit by me. About 15 minutes into the movie, I noticed him shifting one seat closer. I looked back at my parents to see if they noticed, but instead they're enjoying the movie, so I start to think, if this guy moves one seat closer, I'll start a scene. I must have zoned out on the movie because the movie is about halfway in, and the guy is now 2 seats away from me. He's leaning in and his arm is resting on the seat next to him, as if he's ready to grab me. Without taking my eyes off the screen, I thought, this is it. I'm gonna knock this guy out. When I hear my dad yell, "Get the fuck away from my daughter before I break your neck," my mom threatens to call the cops. I look and see the guy starts to run out, but really wanting to go out with the promise I made to myself, I throw my phone at him. I missed and hit the wall. The movie stops and the lights turn on. The manager rushes in and asks what's going on. My dad tells him he saw some guy try to reach over and grab me. The manager calls the cops and I give them my statement. The entire ride home was a lecture from my parents about being careful when you're alone in public. And I just sat in the back of the car, beating myself up about my poor aim. That being said, creepy movie theater guy, let's not meet again. 9. When I was a teenager, I took a job at a local grocery store. My job description was basically to be the gopher. I fetched carts, bagged groceries, cleaned messes, set up displays and the like. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I was young, and it was money, but I digress. One day I was out in the lot in the middle of my fetching carts. There was only a couple, so I grabbed them and began walking back to the entrance of the store. I was passing the last few parking spaces before crossing the little roadway in front of the entrance, when I hear, "Hey, excuse me," coming from my left. I turned my head and see a man in the passenger seat of a big truck. I was facing the store, and the truck had pulled into a spot in the last row to the left of the store, in a way that I was nearest the passenger and the driver was closest to the front doors of the store. I replied, "Yes," and he motioned me to come closer. I approached the truck carefully, so I was just close enough to see in. It has been years, so I can't give a very detailed description, but they were both broad and had beards, and were probably in their mid-30s. When I stopped, the passenger asked, "Does a woman named April work here?" There was a woman who worked there with that name, but she wasn't there that day. I was young, but not a total idiot, and I didn't want to tell him yes, because anyone who knew her would just go in and ask for her, right? I couldn't find the words, but I guess my look told him yes. I was just kind of standing there muttering ums and uhs. He looks kind of exasperated with me, and reaches down and pulls up his wallet, and pulls out a $100 bill, and a piece of paper that says, "Look, we know she works here. I will give you this now, and another one as a reward later, if you just call me next time she comes into work, and don't mention to her or anyone about this." He sticks his arm out the window, with the money, and what I assume is his phone number. Now I'm scared. Two big men are offering a young-looking girl $200 to tell them when another woman comes into work. Shady is an understatement. I hadn't worked there too long, and April was older, late 20s I think. But she was a co-worker and this was creepy. My loyalty was to her, not two weird strangers. I quickly went from scared to mad, and when I found my voice I very sternly said, "Absolutely not." I ditched the carts I had and practically ran back into the store. I heard the truck start up and back out to leave on the side exit of the lot. When I got inside I was shaking and breathless, and my manager immediately asked me what was wrong. I relayed this story with my shaky voice, and he went outside to check, but they were long gone. We went up to the office and he called the police, and then called April to tell her the story. I ended up having to write down my account of what happened, and talk to a couple officers that showed up. I reviewed the surveillance tapes with my manager and boss, but the truck had parked out of range of the cameras. Like I said, shady. I was allowed to go home after that, and had the next 2 days off. For about 2 weeks April didn't work, and when I asked my manager if we had any idea about who those people were, he said he didn't know. When April did come back, she took me aside and thanked me. I just told her I did what I thought was right, and that was that. She didn't tell me what was going on, and I didn't ask. I never heard anything more about it. I left that job a few months later for a better one, and still don't know the full story. I'm just glad April wasn't in that day, and her and the shady truck guys never had to meet. 10. Boring intro. I live in a cabin on about 50 acres of fields and woods with my mom. We've been enjoying a day of sitting on our asses and watching television. However, I had to mow my grandmother's yard this afternoon. I told my mom that I have a yard to mow today, and it went as follows. Me: it's cooler outside. I guess it's a good time to get off my ass. Mom: or you could just call and tell her you'll do that tomorrow. Me: nah, I'm gonna get my things together and go. Proceeds to grab headphones, e-cig, etc. Juicy part. So I headed down the driveway, topped the hill, and lo behold, there were at least 20 MS Highway Patrol cars in the middle of my field, about 70 feet from my truck. I had just assumed that our neighbor, who has a history of cutting up, had gotten himself into huge trouble with the law over drugs or something. When I was pulling out of the gate, I told one of the local cops that I'm the landowner and asked if everything's alright. He said, "It's going to be," whatever that means. On my way to my grandmother's house, I called my mom and said, "I don't know any other way to put this other than there are like 100 cops in our field." She said that she's on the way to check it out. I called her a few times with no answer, assuming that she's talking to the cops or something. I knew she'd be safe with all those cops, so I went ahead and started mowing the grass. Plus, my grandmother is only a couple of miles down the road. When I was about halfway done mowing, she called me saying that the troopers had nothing to say, but one of the local cops that we know said it was this guy wanted in Texas for shooting 3 people, killing 2 and injuring 1. The guy drove into our field and shot himself after being confronted and surrounded by troopers. When I was done mowing, I headed back home to pick her up, and we drove back to talk to the last few troopers. I told them that I am the property owner and asked if it was all clear and if everything's safe now. They said that they had just moved the body and car out, so it's clear. I said, "Wow, all the way from Texas, huh? Well, be safe, thanks." We drove over to the site after the troopers left. Right behind our old pecan tree were a bunch of tire treads and a giant bloody spot in the grass. We are still in a state of what the fuck. Going by the press conference we just watched as I was typing this guy shot himself as I was going up the driveway. I didn't even hear the gunshot or sirens, but I remember having my radio turned up. So, Randall Lee Burroughs, I'm glad we didn't meet. 11. Please be aware the following story contains themes of animal cruelty. When I cast my mind back to the events I'm about to describe, I see images that could almost be from a dream or a fevered imagination. It was utterly bizarre, and I can't believe that it happened. I grew up in Paisley, a town in Scotland. I used to hang out with a load of alternative kids, and being too young to go to a pub, we would stock up on booze at weekends and go adventuring. We had heard about a huge, abandoned insane asylum just outside of town. It was called Levendale, look it up. So we decided to hit it one weekend and make a day of it. The old place was located not far from the high school most of us went to, and was close to a housing estate. By close, I mean about a mile into undeveloped land. We got the booze, shoved it into our backpacks, and made our way out to the place. It was quite hard to get to. We didn't realize there was an easier route yet. So the 8 or 9 of us ended up jumping a fence into some little woodland that was nestled between a bunch of buildings to see if we could push through to the abandoned complex. Weirdly enough, there was a little path in there that led through various tiny meadows and then into pockets of trees. There was a small stream as well, running near to the path but hidden by really tall grass. As we made our way along, I heard some sounds from behind me. I was last in the group, and saw a figure darting away from view into the grass, surrounded by smoke. I was really confused for a second, and then shouted to everyone else to stop and take a look. As we stood transfixed, the grass suddenly started being consumed by ever-growing flames. As it was a roasting summer's day, the flames seemed to grow really fast, and quickly I felt panic setting in. It wasn't long before the flames were starting to spread all around us as we frantically pushed forward through the grass to the next foresty bit of the trail. I saw a deer in there, terrified, and it wouldn't run, because the path ahead beyond the trees was on fire as well. There was smoke everywhere, and I remember a friend of mine shouting to run down the river and wait in there. We all ran down through literal fire to the water. There was no way out, as the whole area was surrounded by really high walls with fences on top at this point. So we had to crouch down with our heads right beside the water to breathe at all. The fire burned for ages, and we could hear animals screaming from what used to be the tree area we had been standing in. It was now a huge fireball. Eventually, after what seemed like forever, the fire burned down enough for us to try and move out. There was limited material to burn, since it was a pretty confined area. We pushed on up the river for a bit, but it ended up going underground into a wall shaft or something. So we had to double back and work up the path. We ended up having to go through the trees, and we were horrified by what we saw. Loads of deer were stacked up near an opening that must have had air, and were burned really badly. The heat was still intense, and there were still flames licking off the trees, so I, for one, didn't want to hang around for too long. But I'll never forget the image of those deer twitching and dying. We made it out the other side and made it through the Levendale complex ahead of us. All we could think of was finding a safe place to stop and have a drink, and maybe another route home. I was the only one who saw the figure, but we were all pretty convinced that some group of people had set fire to the path from both ends. Whether it was meant as a prank that went too far, we won't ever know. But it was life-threatening in the end. We ended up finding another path back to civilization, thankfully, that didn't involve walking through a confined area. I wonder sometimes if it was a prank, or if some really sick people wanted to kill us. The heat is something I can't forget either. It was like being in an oven or under a grill, and our eyebrows were all singed off, and we looked like we'd been covered in soot. Won't ever forget it. And as ever, team of pyromaniacs, please, let's not meet again. 12. I grew up in a small city. So when I moved up into the mountains in Colorado, I took the opportunity to go on a fair amount of walks out in the woods all around my house. For the most part, I would only walk the woods behind our house, since we had a very large property. One day, feeling bored of the woods behind our house, I asked my parents, and they told me I could walk the woods across the street. I excitedly rushed out to go walking across the street. As soon as I got to the edge of the woods, though, I was already a bit unnerved. On the ground, I saw the shell of a bullet. I felt especially frightened because I have a fairly irrational fear of guns. But I decided to get over my fear and continue on, because the case was obviously old, covered in dirt and such, and we lived by a big hunting town, so it was to be expected. The next weird thing I came across was a pile of deer hair. I, obviously not knowing much about hunting, saw it and thought that a doe must have laid there when she was having her babies. At that moment, I was excited, not realizing that the hair was most likely the result of a deer being shot in that spot. The final, weirdest, and worst thing I found was at a clearing in the woods. A clearing I didn't realize was on a person's property at the time. As soon as I got out of the clearing, I saw a large block of styrofoam with 2 iron rods stuck through it to keep it standing in place, and it was full of bullet holes. Looking around, I noticed deer bones scattered around, and the bones of some other animals, including a full set of some small animal's bones, laying on a rock beside the styrofoam. Confused and not quite sure what I had found, I decided to go and get my parents. When I got them to come, I first showed them the pile of hair, and they pointed out to me how it was probably where a deer had been shot. Then I led them to the styrofoam, and the first thing they pointed out was that we were right in someone's front yard. Mind you, it was a giant front yard, and the house was small off in the distance. After looking at the dead animals, we noticed two things. Not only did one of the animals have a chain around it, chaining it to one of the poles the styrofoam was on, but some of the animals I couldn't recognize at first were obviously domestic cats and dogs. At the end of the day, all we could do was walk home. It sounds terrible, but the animals were obviously dead for a long time, and we believe they were killed by the crazy former owner of the property we were on. The owner was long gone, and the police force in our town was so small and poorly trained that they probably would have simply gotten mad at us for being on someone's property and not really care about what we found. I'm sad that we couldn't do more, but I genuinely believe no justice would have come from calling the police. 13. I live about 20 miles from the city in which I work. I live out in the country, and about a short walking distance from my house is a highway, and on the corner is a 24/7 gas station. Last week, Saturday night, I went by there before midnight to grab some Cajun peanuts. I see one car parked on the side, which is normal. Usually just a guy working and rarely any customers at this time. Do you ever feel this dread overcome you? Like you know something is wrong? Well, I walk in and don't see anyone. Nobody behind the counter or in the store. So I take my time and assume they are in the bathroom or step to the back of the store. Surely they heard the chime on the door when I came in. I'm feeling weird and uncomfortable, so I wait a minute even though it seemed like forever. So I call out, "Anyone here?" I wait a minute more and put the peanuts down and walk out the door. I check the car parked on the side, and there wasn't anything troubling. I even glanced on the back side of the store and there was nobody. I'm pretty uncomfortable, so I just call the police. They show up 10 to 15 minutes later, but it really did feel like an hour, and they search the place. They find the cashier dead in the men's bathroom, beaten to death. They called in backup, asked me to recap what I experienced, and then I went home. That ain't even the fucked up part. So I get home and my dog is in the front yard pissing and just staring at me. He is an inside dog, and my front door is cracked open. My heart is racing, so I grab my dog and head back to the gas station and let the police know. They send one of the guys to search my house. Nothing is stolen or out of place, but there was sign of forced entry. This was last week, and about 5 hours ago I get a call from my brother who works for the county sheriff's office. Supposedly, they pulled the camera footage, and about 10 minutes before I walked into the store, someone came in, started punching on the cashier, and then dragged him into the bathroom. On the footage, you can see me walk in and look around and call out. And then you can see me walk out and check out the car, walk to my vehicle and make a call. Around the time I'm in the vehicle, the alleged murderer walks out of the bathroom and sneaks out the back door. And before leaving the view of the camera, he takes off in the general direction of my house. Fortunately, my wife was out with some friends, watching Beauty and the Beast, again, but I'm convinced that I missed a murderer at the gas station, and then he broke into my house. This week I had a new security system installed, alongside a new front door, but I'm pretty sure whoever did this is still out there. Edit. I can address some comments. I think it was a coincidence that he broke into my house, if he actually did break into it. It was late at night and there were no vehicles, and since my house is within 200 yards, it was probably just an opportunity. I will address the comment about proof. I've mentioned that my house is so close, so if I give the article, it'll be essentially easy to know where my house is. "14. This is an experience that has been bothering me for years, so I felt I should finally post something about it, in case it's helpful in some way. I used to live in a subdivision in the middle of nowhere, north of Divide, Colorado. Our gravel street ended in a cul-de-sac, and we were the middle house of the three at the end of the street, which was on the side of a hill. Because we were pretty far away from anything, I was a latchkey kid, and usually was home alone for a few hours after school. This took place in the early 80s when I was about 8 or 9 years old. One day, shortly after the bus dropped me off and I got home, I saw someone pull into the driveway. I didn't recognize him, so I hid behind our wood-burning stove in the corner. He came up and started insistently knocking on the door and looking in the window. He then strangely tried the doorknob. He just wouldn't stop knocking, so I came out thinking if this guy was a burglar and he saw me, he would go away. When he saw me, he asked me through the door, which had a window pane, if I could open the door, and I replied my dad was in the shower. He didn't react and said that he was here to see my neighbors, mentioned them by name. I told him they lived next door, in the house on the left. He said okay, seemed a bit frustrated, and started walking away to his car. But instead of getting in his car, he started walking around my house. The house was built on the side of a hill, so it had a walkout basement. I started freaking out because at this point, this wasn't normal, and I thought he was going to try to get in through the sliding glass door in the basement, which was locked. I got ready to jet out the door and into the woods, but then I saw him come up the other side of the house, get into his car, and tear out my driveway up the gravel road. He never did go to my neighbors who he said he was looking for. Sobbing, I picked up the phone and called my neighbor halfway up the street, who had a son my age and used to watch me sometimes. She had seen the car speed up the gravel road and told me to come over. So I took off running through the woods to my neighbor's house, avoiding the road in case he turned around and came back. Of course I told my parents, and I don't really think they let it sink in, and since my neighbors weren't home, they said he probably mistook the house. From my standpoint, I am pretty sure if I opened that door, I would not be here today. No one randomly drives down my street, much less into the subdivision in the middle of the mountains where I lived. And I never saw the guy at my neighbor's house. I vaguely remember my parents asking my neighbors if they knew the guy based on the description. Shorter white guy, round glasses, long brown hair, slightly balding, and a longish beard. But they didn't know who that might be. I've always felt he knew I was there alone based on his non-reaction to me, saying my dad was in the shower. Knew the layout of the house, which is why he walked down the side of the house to the walkout basement, and preferred to not leave any physical evidence, which is why he didn't break in. Not sure if my neighbors knew him or not, but because of the remoteness of the location and the fact that we often played in the woods, I'm pretty sure if I did get snatched, they would have chalked it up to me getting lost or hurt wandering around. We moved out of state a year or so later. Never heard of any other local kids go missing, but I can't believe that this guy didn't try to make someone else disappear. 15. I had gotten out of the Trailways bus that I had been stuck in for 5 hours. My roommate was with me, and we had been traveling back to New York City to conclude the fall semester at our college. It was winter break for the students, so most of them had a suitcase or bag to bring home. I had graduated at that point, so I had 2 large duffel bags and 1 large paper shopping bag that held my pillows and comforter. My other things had been picked up and driven down by my parents during the graduation ceremony. So I literally only had the clothes on my back and some other nonsense like flip-flops and remaining school notes. I was weary and anxious to be finally home. I said bye to my now former roommate, and I continued towards the Ace train, awkwardly lugging my things. Suddenly a woman spots me from the crowd. She's much taller than me and built wider, but seemed very meek. Her voice was shaking and her clothes were dirty and mismatched. It was winter, but she didn't have a coat, but was still wearing a braided scarf. Excuse me, where is the bus to Boston? She asked. She was clearly American, but had an unusual accent, like a Midwest Minnesotan twang. Her eyes were darting towards the direction behind me. I'm already a little suspicious, and New Yorkers aren't known as the warmest people. I also felt vulnerable because I had so much literal baggage on me. I quickly told her to ask an attendant and went to pass her. She quickly stepped in front of me again very closely. She wore very thick eyeliner that was smudged and had bruises on her neck, which her scarf was covering. She never made eye contact with me, but kept staring past my direction. Nobody's helped me. You gotta help me find my bus, she cried, almost sounding like she was acting. I pointed to a woman by an information desk. No, you have to show me where it is. I don't know, ma'am, I have to go, I managed to say in a low voice. It felt like a setup. Where is the Boston bus? She yelled at me. I once again nodded towards the woman tending the information desk, but she was clearly focused on me. Red alert went through my head because she insisted so strongly that I had to help her, and there were dozens of other people and attendants around, and my hands were tied. I looked to my side and saw dark figures in the corner, maybe 25 feet from me, and the woman awkwardly kept her hands tucked in her pants, not a pocket. I began distancing myself as the figures began moving towards me. I finally yelled at her to get the fuck away from me while pretending to reach for something in my jacket. Her eyes flashed to the dark figures and suddenly her demeanor changed. She backed up from me and said, but I need to get to Boston bus, She was clearly distracted, now looking back and forth into my big paper bag, and then at the people she may have been working with. Now she looked nervous, and after a few long moments, she turned and walked away, quietly, into the women's restroom. Now looking at the sketchy guys in the corner, I quickly turned and went towards the upstairs portion of the terminal, left and hailed a cab. I just wanted to get home at that point. Thinking about it now, I'm wondering if she were someone who was trafficked or manipulated into drugs. It was like she was an empty shell of a person, but she was still young, mid-20s or so. 16. My idiot mom dated a convict while she worked as a psychologist at the Kingston Pen. He was in for a very long sentence for aggravated assault, and my mother met him close to the end of his sentence. She eventually was fired for being caught, for the second or third time, having sex with him in a utility closet. But I digress. When he was being released, my mother asked me to pick him up from prison and drive him to the airport, and I, embarrassed to admit, stupidly agreed. So my boyfriend at the time and I go to pick up Dick Knuckle. And not 45 minutes into our 3-hour trip, after picking him up, he turns around and starts punching my boyfriend in the face, busting his nose and lip. I start yelling at him to stop, and so he starts beating on me, punching me in the arms and legs. Mind you, I'm driving about 90 miles per hour on the highway, with no exit in sight. I just want to add, this guy is a big fucking dude. 6 foot something and probably over 200 pounds of muscle, covered in tats, the whole shebang. Anyway, I pull off to the side of the highway, get out, throw his bag on the side of the road and scream at him until he gets out of my car before speeding home. I want to remind you all this happened on a Monday. Wednesday rolls around, and I get a text from my brother telling me to call him ASAP. So I do, and he tells me mom is in the hospital in a coma, hooked up to machines, feeding tube, etc. She had broken orbital sockets, her jaw was broken, she was missing many teeth, shattered collarbone. She cracked her sternum and had broken multiple ribs. She needed reconstructive surgery on her face and metal plates put in. She has nerve damage now and can't smile on the right side of her face. She has trouble eating too because she can't tell whether or not she has food dripping down her face. And for the longest time, she could only drink through a straw. What had happened was, after I kicked dipshit out of my car, the cops found him wandering on the side of the freeway and took him to the airport. Tuesday night he arrived. He got hammered drunk and beat the shit out of my mother. He started at 11 p.m. and nobody stepped in until 3 a.m. First responders didn't show up until 4. I guess a couple people witnessed it going down but didn't intervene until they saw douche canoe choke my mom out and start carrying her towards the tree line to finish the job in privacy. My mom now suffers from extreme PTSD. It controls every aspect of her life. She's a fucking mess, the equivalent of a human puddle, I'd say. So convict that will not be named, let's not meet again. Edit. I want to add, my mother dug her own grave, don't pity her. That's absurd. There's a lot more to her crazy relationship with him that I left out because I didn't feel that it was relevant to the story. Things like her smuggling drugs into the prison for him, the police busting down the door and arresting him in the house for another crime. The blood my mom had to clean off the walls after was insane. Him drinking again and jumping out of my car to harass other drivers whilst waiting at a red light when I was taking him to the store. Things like that. 17. This happened in 1979, when I was a 17-year-old girl. I was in London for summer school and stayed with a family friend, Jane, in her apartment. One night I went to a party and ended up staying really late. Being a poor student, I decided to bus home, and got off at the closest bus stop to the apartment, which was still a good 20 to 30 minute walk. By then it was after midnight and the streets were completely empty. I walked down the street, hearing nothing but the sound of my shoes clapping against the pavement. I noticed this guy come out of one of the houses up the street. He was walking towards me on the side of the road. We passed each other without incident. I continued walking down the dimly lit streets, turning my head to see behind me at one point, and saw the same guy. Only now he was walking behind me, keeping his distance. Not wanting to assume he was following me or show any fear, I looked straight ahead and increased my walking speed a bit. After 10 long minutes of walking down several deserted blocks, I finally turned the dark corner into my street. There were still about 5 minutes left till I got home. I stole one more glance behind me. There he was, still keeping his distance. In that moment it became quite clear that he was following me. A sense of dread spread through me on the dark, lonely street as I tried to remain calm and just get home as soon as possible. The apartment was part of a complex, and the front door was located at the back, so you had to go around to get to it. This meant that if I was fast enough, there was a good chance he wouldn't see which apartment was mine. I walked as fast as I could without running, and finally reached the door. No sight of him. Good. With the key in my badly shaking hand, I fumbled at the doorknob, terrified, praying to get it open before he finds me, and I'm never seen or heard from again. My prayers were answered, and I managed to unlock it finally. I hurried inside and locked the door. Safe to be able to breathe again, I went upstairs to my bedroom. Then I made a mistake. My bedroom faced the street, and when I entered, I turned on the light. The curtains weren't drawn, and I saw him standing there looking straight up at me. Next thing you know, he is ringing the doorbell. Panicking, I ran downstairs into Jane's room, who was woken up by the doorbell. Explained the situation to her, and asked her not to open the door. She said she had to because she didn't want him to wake the neighbors. I watched her go, staying in her bedroom. He asked, "Is Mary there?" He must have decided to pretend to ask for someone when he realized I wasn't there alone. She responded, "There's no one here called Mary." He apologized and then left. I breathed a sigh of relief and watched him through the window as he left. As he was walking, he turned around and I had the unfortunate opportunity to meet his eyes once more. He scowled at me through the glass. I shuddered. The next day, Jane told me about all the dodgy things and crimes that happened in that area. Turns out it wasn't a particularly safe area. After that, I only ever went out during the day. I thankfully never saw that guy again, but sometimes I wonder what could have happened if Jane wasn't there that night. 18. Years ago, I worked night shift at a very lonely and deserted mini office that had no security and only me on staff from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. Despite being located in a rather busy and nightlife-filled part of the city, food delivery pickings were more than a tad slim. So you can imagine how delighted I was when I found a great Chinese place that was open late and delivered to my work. They had great portions and killer egg rolls. So I ended up ordering from there most nights, and everything was great. Until Phone Guy entered the picture. The owner had decided that he wanted a native English speaker to man the phones, so that he could run the register and everyone else could just focus on cooking and delivery. We will call the person they hired Phone Guy. And I know all of this because Phone Guy told me. And Phone Guy told me because he loved to talk. This guy was a chatterbox and made every order feel like I had called him at home to chat instead of actually get my food. Well, the normal order calls started getting longer and longer as Phone Guy starts trying to chat me up while waiting for the credit card machine. He starts asking me about my age, my race, where I went to school, all the red flags. I deflected most of his questions except the one about race. I'm white, so I thought if I just told him maybe he would lose interest. Nope. Now he wants to know what kind of white, which is not a question I had ever really been asked. So I just answered honestly that I'm mostly German. Well, turns out this dude has a thing for German chicks. Doesn't matter I'm second generation, or that I've never been to Germany. This dude is now full-on interested and starts going on about how Germans are so this and so that, and they make the best porn and so on and so forth. This has cemented in me that I will no longer be ordering from these people, as this is getting ridiculous. Eventually the machine frees up, and the call ends and I think I'm in the clear. Nope. The guy who has been delivering my food up to this point looked like Ken from Street Fighter with a meth problem, complete with sleeveless red shirt and bandana. The guy who shows up with my food is not the regular delivery guy. He is huge, and as soon as he opens his mouth, I realize he is Phone Guy. Internal screaming commences. He hands me the food and just starts to talk, and talk, and talk. I can't leave since he is blocking my only exit. I can't shove him out the door since he has a foot and about 200 pounds on me. So I just keep bringing up that I need to get back to work. And oh, it's so very late, and boy oh boy will my boss be mad if I don't check in. I finally bring up the fact that he should really be getting a move on himself. What with the other deliveries he must have to make. Nope. He proceeds to tell me that he paid the regular delivery guy to switch out with him for this one delivery, just so he could meet his Fräulein. Internal screaming intensifies. Eventually, he even admits he has overstayed his welcome and leaves for the night, at which point I lock the door behind him and stop ordering after that. Through happenstance, I end up quitting my job about a week later, for a better one, and I think I am in the clear. Well, months go by, and my roommate orders from them. Turns out they had expanded their delivery area, and asks if I could snag it when it gets there, since she needs to hop in the shower. I think it should be fine. I mean, this is a different address, and not in my name, so there's no way the Phone Guy will show up. Well, I answer the door, and the meth Ken takes one look at me and says, "Oh man, I can't believe it's you. Do you live here? Phone Guy has been looking for you everywhere since you stopped ordering and quit your job. I can't wait to tell him." I tell him not to do that and he laughs. He hands me the food and leaves. I hadn't worked that job or ordered in months. Phone guy was looking for me this whole time. Well, I am 100% onion rings. My roommate gets out of the shower and I tell her what happened, and she tries to brush it off, just as there is a knock at the door. I tell her I am going upstairs and whoever it is, don't let them in if we don't know them. I listen at the top of the stairs and it is Phone Guy. The delivery dude had gone straight back to work, told Phone Guy, and Phone Guy had thrown a bunch of egg rolls into a bag. I used to order them all the time. Got the address from the order my roommate had placed, and despite us not ordering anything else, had raced to my house. He handed my roommate the egg rolls and just kept trying to get her to let him in and answer questions about where I went, where I worked now, and whatnot. She was smart enough to get creeped out and tell him to leave, and as soon as the door shut, I called the place and complained since I knew he wouldn't be there to answer the phone. The owner answered and apologized after I explained what was going on. He said he had daughters of his own and would take care of it. Phone Guy shows up again an hour later, banging on my door and screaming that I got him fired. Blah blah blah. So we called the cops, but he was gone before they showed up. I explained what happened, but they said there wasn't much they could do. We were moving in 2 weeks anyway to the other side of the city, so the problem solved itself due to amazing timing. For those wondering, I was in the area months later that the restaurant was located in, and the place had shut down. Also, I didn't want the egg rolls, so my roommate ate them. 19. A few weeks ago, my boyfriend was running late to work, so instead of dropping me off at my work, he dropped me off at the metro station stop next to his work. There's a stop that's only a few minute walk from campus, so I wasn't too worried about it. As I'm waiting for the train at the stop, a random person thanks me for my service. I'm caught off guard, but realize that I had my military backpack on, complete with my last name stitched on. A man, covered in face tattoos and wearing dirty, smelly clothes, overhears and walks over to me as well.
Oh, you're in the military? My wife is too. She's the exposition for Y Unit. Actually, you look really familiar. Were you at the holiday party at the racetrack?
The specifics checked out, but I definitely didn't remember a guy with face tattoos showing up at the event. I tell him that I might know her, but it's a big unit. The train comes, and I walk on to take my seat.
Smith, Amanda Smith, I knew I recognized you.
I turn around and it's Face Tattoo Man. He knows my whole name and decides to sit down next to me on the train. He starts asking me questions about my job and how his wife is doing. He says that she was feeling stressed out with her job, and that she was worried she was going to get fired. I thought it was a little weird, considering that she had been fired over a week prior, but maybe he was trying to be polite and not embarrass her. But then, he started asking some strange questions. Where do we go for off-site training? When do we go? When's the next time I will train with her? I realized something was really wrong. So I get off at the next stop to try to get away from this guy. He gets off the train too.
Let's go together. You never answered my questions.
I look for my phone to call someone to get me out of this situation, and I realize I left it in my boyfriend's car. I decide to tell him I got off at the wrong stop, and try to get on a different car than him when the next train arrives. Just kidding, he gets off that car and onto mine at the next stop. He starts threatening me about giving information about her, so I stand up, start making a scene, saying that I need help. A man intervenes and I get off at the next stop, which is actually my stop. I contact that woman, and it turns out that since the holiday party, he has started doing heroin and became violent toward her. She and the kids moved out to an undisclosed location, and he tried abducting them at least once. He had become homeless, so that explains why I didn't recognize him at all. He did recognize me from the party, and he was trying to figure out when she would next be around. She had a restraining and no contact order against him, so she encouraged me to contact the police if this ever happened again. I decided not to take the train anymore, and ditch my backpack altogether. Last week, I was working late and decided to walk over by the train stop to get some food. As I'm waiting to cross the sidewalk, I hear,
"Amanda, good to see you."
I look behind me, and face tattoo guy is standing behind me. No. Let's not meet and have dinner as you try to figure out how to kidnap your wife. I turn and take off sprinting down the busy road to get away. I'm definitely staying away from the whole line. Forever. 20. For context, I'm female. At the time, I was 19 years old. I was living in a central flat with my older sister. We were out this one weekend, celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Me, my sister, and a few friends. Starting out having pints at an Irish pub, we soon moved on to a popular hotel bar. I was a bit tipsy at this point, so I decided to switch to water, as I had work early the next morning. We were having a great time, and nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. But I decided anyway that I'd head home. It was a 10-minute walk, at the very most, thankfully, due to my early start the next day. Anyway, I said goodbye to my friends and headed out into the nice, clear evening. I walked a couple of blocks, and went to a 7-Eleven on the corner to buy a bottle of juice. There are always some semi-sketchy types hanging around on that street corner. That's where black cab drivers tend to hang around waiting for customers. So I didn't pay much attention to any of them. I exited the shop and turned the corner to an empty street, and hear footsteps behind me. Look behind. It's a pretty big guy, seemingly advancing on me. I lifted my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. Without pressing the call button, crossed the street to see if he would follow, which he immediately did. I was heading in a direction immediately away from the shops, and I couldn't turn around without ending up face to face with him. Shit. Turned another street corner towards my door. Important to note is that this house didn't have a front door key as such. It was a 4-digit passcode that granted access to the building, and then you'd have to open your own door with a key. The only thing I can think is, don't let him see the code. If he sees the code, you're dead, etc. This type of sentence was pulsating in my mind, and I started running in stiletto heels. He too is picking up the pace and is running after me. At this point, I'm not really feeling anything. It was so strange. It was like I had the actions laid out in front of me. I had to outrun him, reach my door before he did. There was no option. As I made it to the door, I covered my keypad with my hand before hurriedly punching in the code. He didn't catch it. Nevertheless, he is trying to forcibly push his way in. I've often wondered how exactly I'd react in a situation like this. You never know until you're actually exposed. Well, apparently I get angry. Started shouting at him to get the fuck away, etc. He responds with laughter and, "No way. You know I live here too." So I ask him for the passcode and he is trying to laugh it off and keeps pushing me in. I remembered I still had a sturdy grip on my phone and showed him the screen where I had keyed in 911 triumphantly. I kept shouting abuse, that he needed to leave or I'd call. Thankfully he got a terrified expression on his face and ran. On shaky legs I managed to get to the lift into my flat, secured the door, what felt like 1,000 times. I called my sister at first, no answer. I called my boyfriend, panicking. He hadn't been out with us that night, he too was laughing it off. Told me that it was probably just some guy that fancied me, and decided to fool around a bit. I wasn't convinced, and barely slept that night. I told my sister the next morning after she'd asked me about all those missed calls. My sister told me at that point that she got a weird vibe from a guy sitting across from the bar, that he was staring at us. We compared descriptions and they seemed to match. She didn't remember seeing him at all after I left. I still wonder sometimes if something serious could have happened, and how strange it was that my mind fixated completely on the passcode. 21. This story happened back in the late 90s when I was in 2nd grade. At that time, my uncle, my mom's younger brother, was enlisted in the US Navy. Due to the nature of his job, he constantly traveled to other parts of the world. He was frequently stationed in different countries, sometimes for years at a time. Since he was usually so far away, my family did not get to see him very often. My mother and him were very close, and I had a special relationship with him as well. Every time he visited a new place, he would send me a gift, a magic lamp from Saudi Arabia, castanets from Spain, rosary beads from Notre Dame, and so on. He always had a lot of fun, and I treasured the time that we spent together. This particular year, he received some time off, and informed us that he would come stay with us for the holidays. I was beyond thrilled to be seeing one of my favorite relatives. One day, while both of my parents were at work, he decided to take my brother and I to a nearby mall. At the time, my brother was 12 and I was 7. We had a good time going to the various stores, getting lunch and watching skateboarders at an indoor park. Although my uncle loved us dearly, I wouldn't exactly call him the most attentive babysitter. While the three of us were heading out, my brother and uncle were much further ahead of me. Both of them walked extremely fast and seemed to be engaged in their conversation. Being a very small girl for my age, combined with having Lyme disease, made it difficult for me to walk at their pace. As hard as I tried to catch up with them, I only seemed to be falling further behind. Suddenly, from the left side, I felt someone grab me. It happened in an instant, and my mind raced trying to process what was happening. Looking up, I saw him, a face that I recall clear as day 20 years later. He was an old man, perhaps late 70s, but his face was horribly disfigured. All of his skin hung low and poured over his other features. What I remember most was his nose was more of a giant tumor so large that it covered his entire mouth. Looking back, it's now clear that he had elephant man disease. The man did not say anything to me. Instead, he crouched down to my level and put his face just inches in front of mine. Then he made the most intense eye contact I have ever experienced. Both of his hands were wrapped around my arm so tightly that I winced in pain. Abruptly, he began shaking me as if forcing me to look at him. I was so paralyzed in fear that I could not make a sound. For some reason, I simply stood there frozen, staring directly at him. While this was happening, the mall was by no means empty. People passed by, but they either didn't notice or didn't care. After about a minute, which seemed far longer, adrenaline got the better of me, and I violently wriggled from his grip. In tears, I moved as briskly as I could towards my uncle and brother. Luckily, the man did not follow me. By this time, my family members had finally realized that I was gone, and both turned around while I approached them. Their backs were to me during the entire encounter, so they had no idea what just occurred. I didn't say anything to either of them, because I was afraid somehow I had done something wrong. When I got home, I had bruises from where the man had grabbed me. I hid them from my mom so I didn't have to explain what had happened. The incident left me so traumatized that the very same night I went vegetarian. In my 7-year-old mind, every time I looked at meat, I would think of that man's face and the way he had stared so intently at me. I would have nightmares that he was coming back for me, and was petrified to go back to that mall for many years. Now that I am an adult, I will look back and wonder what exactly transpired. Did he want to kidnap me? Was he tired of being ignored by society? Perhaps he had dementia. I will never know. Even though I have empathy and wish him well, I will also take solace in the fact that we will probably never meet again. Disclaimer. In no way, shape, or form is it my intention to speak ill of individuals who have any type of deformity or condition. This story is simply my recollection of an event that occurred when I was a child. Please keep this in mind in your comments, as I would never judge someone based on physical characteristics that they cannot control. 22. Okay, so I live in northern British Columbia, and this first incident happened in the middle of winter. My boyfriend and I were having a huge fight at around 11:30 p.m. He snowplows in the winter, so his hours are really whack. And I soon retired to the front steps of my house to have a cigarette and feel sorry for myself. My pity party was short-lived when I heard some faint screams. It sounded like it could have been a block or two away, I wasn't sure. At first, I just thought it was teenagers screaming and goofing around late at night. We've all been there, right? Then I saw some cats in the middle of my street and thought, maybe it's their meows carrying in the wind. And then I saw a couple loaders making the rounds, and I thought it could be their backup signals I was hearing. The whole thought process was about a minute. That's when I heard it again, a bit clearer this time. I got up and walked about a dozen or so steps to my front gate, and that's when I heard it again. Except this time I heard them scream, "Help!" Keeping in mind, everything I've heard so far is just faint enough that I can't really tell where it's coming from. So I walk out to the sidewalk, and my eyesight is shit. I think I see my across-the-street neighbor peeking out her front door, so I muster up as much courage as I can and yell, "Hey, did you hear that screaming?" I have really bad anxiety, so taking a chance at looking like some crazy person who's hearing shit was a big deal for me. Not to mention that if I felt like someone was getting assaulted, that my anxiety could hold off one embarrassing encounter. Moving on. My neighbor immediately said yes, she did. She was outside having a cigarette before bed in her backyard when she heard it. See folks, smoking really does save. She said she was going to go drive around the block, and asked if I would come with her. I said yes. We live in a really small town, and it's Canada. Everyone is pretty nice. We drove around for about 15 minutes calling out hello, but we found nothing. I was looking specifically for someone laying unconscious in a snowbank or patterns in the snow that may show signs that there was a fight. We called the cops, and nothing came of it, sadly. I just hope whoever was screaming that night is okay now. It's been a few months since then, and I was just coming home from an appointment today, May 13th, 2017, when my neighbor, same one from earlier, came up to me and asked if I saw anything last night. Apparently there was someone going door to door, knocking on people's doors at 8:30 last night, and when people weren't answering, they were jiggling the door handles. She said she was going around asking neighbors to see who else it happened to, and so far it's her and her left side neighbor who had the same encounter last night at around 8:30. She was letting me know because she's home alone a lot, because her man is out working, and I'm home alone a lot because my man is out, and I have a 3-year-old, and her left side neighbor is a woman who's home alone a lot too. Just a side note, I live in a pretty good area. Everyone mostly owns their homes, and it's a lot of old people or families. Weirdos trying to enter people's homes while they are home, please let's not meet. I have guns and dogs, and I'm a fierce fucking mama bear. I will cut you. 23. This happened about 4 years ago. I guess I always downplayed how creepy it was in my head, so I didn't get too scared at the time. But thinking back, it got really creepy. A side note that helps the story. I lived in Massachusetts at the time, about an hour outside Boston. I met Jack over the summer of 2013. I was at a local country bar. Jack was tall, skinny, bald, a little nerdy, but I liked it. At the end of the night, he asked for my number, and I excitedly gave it to him. He texted me almost immediately and asked if we could hang out together. I had to work the next few days, so we couldn't hang out. But that didn't stop him from texting me almost 24/7. I worked at a children's museum as a guide, on a treetop walkway, so when we got busy, it was hard to text back immediately. Jack was never truly understanding of this, but always hid the frustration under lots of, "I just like talking to you," and "just making sure you didn't fall." I didn't know any better. Finally there came 5 days where I didn't have to work at all, and man did he make the best of them. I had Tuesday to Saturday off, and he had a plan for each day. Clingy, but I ignored it. Here was our schedule. Tuesday and Wednesday. He took me out on dates. It was pretty average aside from the fact that it took a lot of convincing to get him to take me home at the end of the night. He kept saying how much he was enjoying our time together and didn't want it to end. It was at this point I noticed that he wasn't just emotionally clingy, but physically clingy too. If any guy even glanced my way, he would have his arm around me so firmly it would hurt. One older gentleman held the door for me once, and Jack rambled on for hours about how the man was hitting on me. He declared he was lucky to have me all to himself. Creepy. Thursday. It was the 4th of July, and he asked if I wanted to take the train into Boston to see the fireworks. I was excited until he told me that we were going to head into the city at 10 in the morning. It was a 90-degree day, not exactly the kind of weather you want to be gallivanting around Boston in. He said he had fun things planned, and I believed him. We arrive in Boston, get off the train, and start walking. Several times I asked him where we are headed, and if he can slow down a little since he was speed walking. But he ignored me and said he was figuring it out. Finally, he admitted that he didn't really have any plans made, and was hoping to stumble across something. I suggested a few things that I knew about, but he said no to all of them. We walked around for hours. It was so hot that I started to feel dehydrated and exhausted. I suggested we stop for water and sunscreen. He said we would soon. It wasn't until an hour later that I convinced him we needed to stop. At this point, I had such blisters on the back of my heels that my socks were a little bloodied, and I had folded the backs of my sneakers and socks down in an attempt at some relief. We stopped for 5 minutes to get water and band-aids. Then off we went again. It was only a matter of time before I started begging him to stop. Me, please, let's just take the subway. We can sit and it'll be cooler. Jack, oh come on. Walking is the only way to see Boston. Me, Jack, I need to rest, my feet are bleeding. We have been walking for hours. The fireworks start in 2 hours. Let's just find some shade and sit until then. Jack, no, that's too much time to wait. An hour and a half before the show started, we were sitting on a bench. I had convinced him to give me 30 minutes to sit, and said I felt like I would pass out if I didn't. By now I was in pain every second I was walking, and had a nasty sunburn. Suddenly Jack got very sentimental. He started going on about how amazing I was, and how he had his heart broken before, but I proved that love was still possible for him. He claimed that he was falling in love with me, and never wanted to leave my side. Then he decided that fireworks were stupid, and demanded we immediately walk back to the train station and go home. We ended the night on his friend's front lawn where, despite my best efforts, he made me stay until 1 a.m. At this point, I was completely over it. It had been a miserable day. Friday. He wanted to do something in the morning, but I lied and said I was busy. He called me and in a desperate voice asked what I was doing that night. I told him I'd be at the country bar where we had met, but I was going with a friend. He acted okay with it, but kept texting me every few minutes to see what I was doing. That night I confided in my friend about how weird this was all going. She agreed it was getting to be a bit much, and bet he was going to show up at the bar tonight. Sure enough, he did. Halfway through the night he came, pushed his way over to me. He greeted us and hugged me. When he let go, he kept his hand on my arm tightly. I wiggled out of his grip and asked what he was doing here. He said he had driven 2 hours from his house because he needed a kiss. My friend got wide eyes and I dodged him casually as he tried to hold on to my arm again. My friend faked being sick, and I said I needed to take her home, and we left quickly. Saturday. I decided I needed a break from all this Jack. I needed time to plan how to get out of this relationship without a battle. I lied and told him I had to work at the last minute at the museum, and I couldn't hang out. He was so upset and said that he wanted to hang out with me. Around noon, I got a text. "Jack, where are you? I'm here to have lunch with you, and you aren't here." Me, "You're at the museum?" Jack, "Where are you?" I was shaking. I quickly made up a lie that I had gotten a migraine headache, and my boss sent me home. Suddenly his tone changed. "Jack, well, baby, why didn't you tell me? Let me come home and take care of you." Me, "That's okay, I need sleep. That's the best thing for me. I need to sleep it off. Looking at my phone is too bright, it hurts. I need to go to bed." Jack, "Okay, get well, baby. I love you. I'll check on you later." I didn't reply to any of his texts after that. I stayed inside the rest of the day and almost forgot about it, until I woke up around midnight to my phone ringing. It was him. He told me he was near my house on the way to the country bar. He told me he was pulling down my street and to come outside. I told him it was late and I'd wake up my parents. He started begging me to let him see me. He told me he just needed one kiss. I said no. He started getting mad. He told me he had gone long enough without seeing me and that I was being very rude. He demanded I come outside. I felt sick. I crawled across my floor and peeked out my window. He was standing at my door. I hid and told him he needed to leave immediately. He told me he loved me, and I didn't answer. He asked why I was being this way, and I finally just came clean. I broke the whole thing off. I told him I didn't love him, that he needed to leave me alone, that I was sorry but I wasn't the one for him. He hung up, stormed to his car and peeled away. The noise woke up my mom and I told her everything through tears. We sat in the dark living room for the rest of the night, waiting to see if he'd come back. He didn't. The next day I had to work. I was terrified he would show up. I told everyone at the museum who he was and what he looked like. He was not to enter the museum or the surrounding property. Thankfully, I worked with 3 male co-workers on the tree walk that day. I was like a little sister to them and they protected me all day. One of them followed me home afterward to make sure he wouldn't be there. When I got home, my mom told me Jack had done a few passes by the house, and she had called the police to make sure they knew. After that, he just disappeared. He deleted his Facebook, and I never saw him at the country bar again. 24. My family and I lived in a nice house in a relatively friendly town from the time I was 6 until I was 11. The town was generally safe, other than the time some guy tried to lure my sister into his car. From the day we moved in, the neighbors across the street hated my family. We were never quite sure why, but we figured it was because my mom had accidentally parked on their side of the street the first time we visited the house. Regardless, we embarked on a 5-year battle with them that continued back and forth until the day we inevitably moved out. But the story comes from the strange and somewhat creepy, unexplainable things that occurred while we lived across the street from them. The husband and father of the neighbor's household was in his mid-40s. He was bald and gave off kind of a creepy vibe. He would always stare at his teenage daughter, or my mom. For the sake of the story, we'll call him Joe. Joe's father was important in the township for some reason. This meant that Joe pretty much thought he ran my street, neighborhood, and basically anything within a 2-mile radius of his house. So he did whatever he pleased. This included taking my mom's parking spot, cursing and yelling at her, staring at us, and giving us dirty looks. He accused us of messing with his cars after we'd lived there for 2 years, but we ignored it. Of course, we hadn't touched his vehicle, but he was willing to do anything to make us move out. About 1.5 years before we eventually did leave the street, things took a turn in our little feud. My mom was the type of person to take things as a joke, so she would constantly make fun of his accusations and insults, until he put up cameras. He claimed to the cops in our area that the cameras were to prove that we were, in fact, messing with the cars. The only issue with his story was this. The cameras didn't even face his vehicles, they faced our house all the way across the street. This meant that none of his cars were even in frame. And to make matters worse, one camera was pointed directly at my window. I was only 10 at the time, so from that point on, my mom made me keep my shades down and the curtain closed. Other neighbors in the town told us they had gone into his house and seen the video footage, which really did point straight toward my window. I still get chills thinking about that. As if the cameras weren't bad enough, there were various points in which my basement would be broken into and holes would be drilled into the pipes. We had doors outside that led to our basement stairs, and no matter how much we locked them, the drilling didn't stop. We eventually had to nail wooden boards to the entrance. A few months before we moved, my mom had come home from the store late one night to see someone jump from the fence that separated our yard from the street. The guy just stayed in his car and stared at her. To this day, my mom is convinced that all of these things were just tricks Joe was pulling to get us to leave. They worked. Joe, let's not meet again, because quite frankly, you're creepy, even if you didn't hire people to break into my house and basement. 25. So this happened over this past weekend. Me and my friend absolutely love to explore abandoned places, and the biggest place we've been, which is where this story takes place, is an abandoned hospital that is absolutely massive. It's more of a campus area, so not just one big building, but multiple, all connected by underground tunnels. So the time this happened, it was our third time there. Our first time there, we just scoped it out and found an entrance. We didn't explore. Second time we went in and met 3 others there and explored some. Then this last time we went, some weird shit happened. So it's me, my friend Josh, and my other friend Tony, and we go inside the same way we always do. We end up exploring just the 3 of us alone for a bit, and stumble upon 3 others and ask if they want to join us. They ended up being really cool guys, and were actually film students that go to a nearby college. So we explore for around an hour and a half, and we're more showing them around, rather than us all exploring because we've been there before. So anyway, we were in the upstairs of one of the main buildings, and they are all just messing with the things around the room, taking pictures, messing with the piano. I've already seen all of this, so I take a few pictures, then go stand near the other side of the room that we came into, which happened to be right around the corner from the stairs. So I'm standing there, scrolling through my phone, answering texts or whatever, and I happen to see someone out of my peripherals. I look up at the doorway leading to the right near the stairs, and I swear I see a head poking around the corner. Then the head darts back around the corner, like he's trying not to be seen. So staying calm, I walk over to the rest of the group, and tell them what I think I just saw. We all go dead silent and hear nothing. So my friend Josh decides to be the first to look, and I'm right behind him. He goes around the corner and I'm getting my knife out, just in case, and put it in my hand in my pocket. So Josh turns the corner and later tells me he saw this guy at the bottom of the stairs with a stick in his hand, ready to hit someone. Then I came around the corner and he drops the stick. So we greet him, a little sketched out that he tried to get away like that, and I immediately had a bad feeling, as I think everyone else did. First off, he had no backpack, no camera, no mask, for asbestos, and whatever else is in the air, and tattered jeans and a military hat, kind of like a camo basic training hat. Little sketchy, but there are 6 of us, so really what's he going to do? So my friend asks if he wants to explore with us, and he says sure, but he's trying to find a friend. So we start going to look for his friend with him, and I soon realize he's taking us in circles, literal circles around the whole building, going upstairs, downstairs, to the basement, upstairs, All the while he is texting or calling his friend every few minutes, trying to find him. So he finally stops after an hour of aimlessly wandering, and we get a second to talk to him. One of the film students has been filming all day, and asked if he was familiar with the place. He says yeah, he's been here a few times, and knows the place pretty well, despite him taking us in circles for an hour. So the film student asks if he can get him on video, explaining some history of this place, and this sketchy guy says,
No, I can't. I just can't do that.
This strikes me as pretty weird, but whatever. Maybe he doesn't like to be videotaped or whatever. So then the sketchy guy insists we stay here while he goes and gets his friend, and then he will meet back up here with us if we just hang out for 10 or so minutes. His words. So my friend Josh says that's fine, we'll wait, and asks for his phone number so we can get into contact. Well, this guy refuses to give Josh his phone number, giving excuses like his phone is dead, as I see him unlock his phone, so it's definitely not dead. So my friend just says, Here, take my number then, and he agrees. Josh gives him his phone number, and he goes on his way to find his friend. The second he is out of earshot, I get everyone together and we all share how fucking sketchy we think this guy is, and decide we need to leave before him and his friend get back. At this point, we don't know where we are and we're all turned around from going in circles for an hour. So we just go back the way we came. Eventually we were in a familiar area, but we can't find the tunnel back to the building we entered at. So we walk up a staircase and there he was with his friend. I was expecting him to be back with about 12 guys to do whatever to us. So that gave me some peace of mind seeing only one guy. So we follow him in circles for another half hour, trying to find an auditorium of some sorts. Then finally I recognize where we are, and see the tunnel we need to go down to get out. So I tell everyone this is the way out, and everyone agrees we need to go. And we're done with this guy. So we say our goodbyes to this sketchy guy and his friend, that are now telling us he knows where it is, and to just follow him a little longer. Luckily, all of us had bad vibes from this guy, and just wanted to get the fuck out. So we go through the last tunnel to get out, and as we are in the room with the window I climb out of to leave, there are these 3 guys all dressed in black, typical metalheads, with band t-shirts and gauges and chained pants, stuff like that. One of them is kind of fat, one of them has a stutter, and the other has hair that went past his eyes. The kid with the stutter asked us if we'd seen their friend, which he explained was the guy with the camo hat on. Keep in mind this guy never mentioned anyone else coming with him, just his one friend he met up with. So the 3 guys asked us if we're leaving and one of us says yes, and they go back through the window we need to go out to get to our vehicles, and say we'll walk you out. At this point, I knew some sketchy shit was going on, so I give Josh the "this is fucking sketchy, man" look, and he just looks back wide-eyed, and we proceed to follow them out. Well, by the time any of us get out, the 3 weird fuckers are gone. Nowhere in sight, when they said they were here to meet the sketchy guy in the camo hat. Whatever their intentions were, to rob us or whatever, their intentions were not good. So we all decide to part ways and leave quickly. We all make it back to our vehicles, and needless to say, we will not be going back there. So sketchy guys in the abandoned hospital, let's not meet again. 26. My friend Carrie is a very quiet girl. She's extremely nice, but very introverted and conserved. I went to a school with her previous to this one, and we tried to get her involved in events, but she always turned us down and went home to hang out with her grandmother. Even in university, she is still expected to call home almost nightly to show that she's safe and in her dorm room. One day Carrie had gotten friendly one lecture with a girl who sat beside her. We will call this girl Danielle. Since they both lived on residence, they walked home together and decided to stop in the dining hall for a chat and get some food. Everything was normal until Danielle steered the conversation into some rather odd topics. First, she began by telling her how she had been in a mental health facility for trying to kill someone in high school. She began telling my friend that when she first arrived in this city, she traveled downtown at night in hopes of finding an intoxicated homeless person that she would be able to overpower and kill. She told my friend of different ways to disembowel cats and offered to show her how to do it. She told my friend of how she had wanted to kill different roommates since she had first arrived on res, but was too worried she would be caught. She also admitted that the only reason she was taking law and forensic courses was to learn to commit crime better. Carrie, already shy and timid around normal people, quickly excused herself and left. 5 minutes after their encounter ended, I got a message on Facebook telling me the entire situation and asking what she should do. I advised she told a professor, which is what she did. Both of us thought that the girl needed help, but we assumed that she was probably lying, or at least exaggerating, in order to get attention. A few days later, I got another message from Carrie, telling me about the events that followed. After Carrie told the professor, she was called in the next day by the police. The school took the threats and claims very seriously, but the police told her not to worry. They also thought she was exaggerating or lying, but said they were going to take her in that night for evaluation. Not long after, Carrie was told that Danielle would not be coming back to residence. She had been admitted to a facility and was banned from the school. A few months later, we were informed of the charges that were being laid against Danielle: animal cruelty, animal neglect, and child pornography. They had found videos of her mutilating animals. With my own research, I found pages of her online, discussing how she liked necrophilia, pedophilia, etc. She proudly boasted about all her fetishes, and claimed online that she had killed before. It turned out she had indeed been in care before because she had tried to kill someone, and had been kept in confinement since she had been removed from the school, as she was considered a danger to staff and other residents. On res, her roommates had claimed that she was up all night and rarely left her room. They also reported a strange smell coming from it, and that she was a bit weird. In her room, the police also found a kit that she was preparing. They found written fantasies about breaking and entering, pedophilia and rape, and believed that this kit was being prepared for when she would finally go and live out these fantasies. They also told Carrie that they believed she admitted all of this to her within an hour of meeting, because she had somehow thought that she had found someone with similar interests, and was looking for a partner to help. Last I heard, she had pled guilty, but her sentencing was postponed as they are doing further psychiatric evaluations of her. Fun times. 27. This happened about a year ago during the summer. I work at a local family-owned grocery store that has its own package store. With the package store comes a bottle return room, and ours is particularly small, with only 2 machines that, may I add, jam and break fairly easily. We're located next to a gas station and convenience store, so we get our fair share of strange, creepy men who love to make young women feel uncomfortable and purposely break our bottle machines so the girls will have to fix them as they watch. We also get a handful of regulars since we're a local shop, and unfortunately many of our regulars are those creepy perverted men. Our bottle room is where this story starts. It was a Saturday night around 8 o'clock. We close at 10 on Saturdays, so although it was summer, it was dark outside once we left work. One of our regulars, I'll call him Jim, came in to return some bottles. Jim is a slightly older, probably in his 50s, short man who smelled of sweat and beer, and loved to sing while returning his bottles. He didn't seem to be as creepy as most of the other men that come in, but I was always cautious around him. Naturally, my co-worker, I'll call him Nick, and I got a call at the registers letting us know the bottle machines were jammed. Nick volunteered to go unjam the machines, since he knew who was behind the call. Nick comes back to the front after a few minutes, and everything is completely normal. He helps a few customers out and waits to see if Jim will come up to the front, before telling me he is going to fill the milk and egg shelves in the cooler. Protocol for closing the store. It doesn't take too long to restock the milk and eggs, maybe 10 minutes on a night where the shelves are empty. But Nick came back within 2 minutes. After he rings up another customer, he told me, "Jim was asking to see you personally, so just a heads up." Despite the gross feeling that gave me, it wasn't out of the ordinary for Jim to say that. Nick cleared his throat and then said quickly, "Oh, and he had a machete, so there's that too." Now, weird shit going down in the bottle room isn't unusual, but I can say I've never seen or heard of a customer carrying a machete in any store. I suggested we call the police, but Nick told me he wasn't threatening anyone with it. He was putting it back in his backpack. So the cops probably wouldn't do much. I shrug it off, for the most part, as I trusted Nick, but still keep it in the back of my head to watch out for Jim. 10 or 15 minutes goes by, and there was no sign of Jim anywhere, so I figured it was safe for me to assume he had left and would redeem his bottle slip another time. The next hour and a half goes by smoothly, and we are getting ready to close our registers and lock our doors, when I see someone run by the floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the building, which is behind our registers. So while I am working on the register, my back is to the windows. I shrug it off again, but I'm still wary and decided to keep myself on high alert and return to my closing business. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the same person run by the sliding doors to my left, tripping the motion sensor, causing the doors to open. I recognize the person as Jim. At this point, I am getting slightly nervous and tell Nick that it was close enough to 10 p.m. for him to lock up. He goes and locks the doors, and I see Jim run by again, totally ignoring Nick. We finish closing and Nick shuts all the lights off, but I tell him not to leave yet, because I was feeling even more nervous about Jim running around outside. As a side note, Jim wasn't just leisurely going for a run around our store. He was pacing, almost like he was circling our store, waiting for us to come out. I let Nick know that I was very unnerved by this, especially since I hadn't driven to work that night, and my mother wasn't there to pick me up. He said it would be okay from inside of the store, and we just needed to wait it out. We were waiting in the aisles of the store, watching Jim closely, when I noticed a gleam of light reflecting off of something in his hand. It was his machete. I texted my mom to tell her to park right in front of the back door, so I could jump straight into her car when she got there. When Nick and I deemed it safe enough to leave, we took the opportunity and booked it out of there. I saw Jim at the front of the store as my mom and I drove off, and I can definitely say that event sticks out to me as the most unsafe I felt at work. I can't tell you why we didn't call the police. I guess I trusted Nick enough to also trust his word against calling them. But looking back, I think it was dumb of us not to call them. Some things to add: I was a 17-year-old girl at the time of this event, and knowing that Jim was asking for me personally, that situation had the potential to get a whole lot worse, especially since we decided not to call the police. I also don't know the laws of carrying weapons in the town I live in, or at my place of work, so I'm not sure if it was illegal to have it on the property of the store, let alone carry it. So, Jim, one thing is for sure. I would really like it if we never met again, especially if you are carrying that machete. 28. I'd like to begin with a notice for all who want to follow this timeline. This is the first of many events that took place during a very terrifying time in my life. The volumes will span over different subreddits, namely R Paranormal, or whatever else I see fit. I'll spend time describing things that will be pertinent to future chapters as well. My new stepfather at the time, Bill, invited my mother, little sister, and myself, age 14, to move into his house in the summer of 2001. It was a small, quiet Texas town that didn't see much in terms of excitement. Bill worked for the city and was well loved and known among policemen, city employees, and citizens. He was about 6'4" and around 220 pounds, a massive man. He was also a hippie, always talking about hundreds of concert experiences and his love for music. In particular, he loved the Beatles. He adored them so much that he had an entire music room dedicated to the Beatles. A drum set, a wall full of Beatles memorabilia, another wall with hundreds of ticket stubs, stereo equipment, and something bizarre and disturbing. A newspaper clip of the Broomstick Murders. Now, this clip was terrifying and bizarre for a couple of reasons. One, the story and brutal murders were in the mid-60s. The pictures were not all censored and showed graphic images of the victims and the crime scene. 2. The clip was out of place in the middle of a music room. When probed, Bill just spewed out about the pride he had for his small town, and how he just found every piece of history interesting. He told us that we don't see papers like that anymore, so we left it at that. The house needed some updating, so we began placing up nicer wall decor and doing wall and floor remodels. The land was on about 10 acres or so, and had 2 sheds and a giant pit to burn things. I found an old restaurant booth in a shed in the back of the property, and spent some time cleaning it up, hauling trash to the pit, and making a cool hangout place for my friends and I. This would be a place that I would spend a good chunk of my time while living at this country home. I dug out a small fire pit, and we would hang out late into the summer night telling stories, laughing, etc. Between creepy memorabilia and the house being stuck in the 60s, it just didn't feel inviting. It felt like Bill didn't want to let any of his things go or put them away to accommodate his new family. He was particularly attached to the Beatles room and, oddly enough, the kitchen. The kitchen was a small room in the middle of the house, floored with an old, stained brown shag carpet. It felt more like a regular-sized room that had a stove, sink, and cabinets in it. He told us that the carpet was actually put down years after the house was built, and we thought it was an odd thing to have a carpeted kitchen. My mother wanted to pull the carpet up and stain the concrete underneath to make it more fit for a kitchen. Bill was extremely adamant on not doing this. I vividly remember them going back and forth on the carpet issue. Finally, Bill cracked, and we all grabbed prying bars to pull the carpet up. Bill's demeanor changed quite a bit as we pulled up the carpet. It was quiet and could be described as nervous. As we pulled up the portion in the middle of the floor, near the stained portion, we began to notice that the stain bled through to the underside of the carpet. While it was difficult to determine the exact color of the stain against the brown shag, the underside of the carpet revealed a large red-orange blob. We all stopped and asked him what spilled. None of us were prepared for the answer. An old lady friend of his was viciously murdered many years back. Her boyfriend got high on PCP and dismembered her limb from limb, not before removing her head. Working for the city, Bill was present when the apartment was remodeled. He kept the carpet. He seemed to grieve and was sincere as he told the story. It looked as though he wasn't aware of how wrong it was to possess something like that in a home. Horrified, we stood back while he was still rolling up the carpet. Spreading it out revealed what we couldn't see before the story. A blood and gore stain in the shape of a torso, surrounded by satellite stains. My mother immediately demanded him to roll it up and haul it to the pit to be burned. He did as he was ordered, and they had a discussion in their room. Bill suddenly wasn't viewed as a nice, gentle giant anymore. He was viewed as a colossal, intimidating psycho. This also immediately set off red flags in regards to why he was so attached to the Beatles room. Whether it was because of his love for the band, or he had more awful things associated with it, was up for debate. He was apologetic to us about keeping morbid artifacts in our home, but it didn't bring us much comfort. My small family had just moved in, and was already plotting on how to escape the situation. This would unfortunately be the beginning of what would turn out to be a string of horrific events that summer. 29. I'm a very open-minded person. I don't like to judge books by their covers because so many do. I like to meet new people, and sometimes more off individuals take advantage of that. My family attributes it to the way that I dress, interestingly, or the fact that I'm very friendly. Well, this time it backfired. At the time I was a sophomore and a theatre major in college, so I was constantly in the arts building. One day I get a friend request from this kid named Paul on Facebook. I saw that he was friends with a lot of my fine arts major friends, a year under me. So, I confirmed it. He started sending me pretty friendly messages, saying that he often saw me in the art building and wanted to say hello but was awkward. No shit. Being the person I am, I kept it loose and cordial. One day I was sitting outside a building on campus after Italian, doing homework before my next class. From the corner of my eye, I see someone approaching very slowly. I lift my head and there's Paul. He slowly says, Monster Mashup, right? As if it wasn't me. Yeah, hi Paul, I say with too much warmth, trying to keep it light. And when I mean awkward, I mean as awkward as you can get. But I didn't want to judge or be rude. He also had this distinct character to his voice. Very bizarre and sniveling, like a villain in a movie. He had crazy curly hair and always carried around his sketchbook. He always came up with the reason to show me new sketches and tell me super personal things about his life, despite my not knowing him. His sketches freaked me out. Not that I displayed that. And they were usually violent and full of ugly, cartoonish women, often topless or naked. On that first day, and from that day on, when he would specifically find me outside that building on those days, he would insist on walking me to my next class. I kind of started avoiding that spot. I really needed that time to get things done. He still continued to send me long personal messages, trying to get to know me. He also commented on how pretty I was on my pictures. I started to get pretty uncomfortable with his aggressiveness. He would try to set up times for us to hang out, and I just really tried to avoid that as much as possible. I was in a play in a company outside school at the time, and he showed up one night, by himself, totally baked. Occasionally I would glance at him and he'd be staring at me. He sent me a message after the show saying I was the best looking one in the production. Shortly after that, I got a message with a link to a picture he drew of me. He had based it off of one from my Facebook. To be honest, it was pretty cool and colourful, not at all like his other pictures. And then I got a message from him, admitting his strong feelings for me. I kind of figured it was coming, but I politely told him that I appreciated his feelings and his friendship, but I was seeing someone, my then long-term boyfriend. Whoops, he freaked out telling me that I was awful, and he did all those things for me. I.e. coming to my show, drawing me a picture, telling me personal shit I didn't want to know. That he never trusts anyone, and I broke that. That his dad had died that summer and he had nothing to live for, so he might as well just kill himself. That escalated quickly. I attempted to stay friendly and rational, but that didn't work at all. He cursed me out and blocked me. On campus, whenever I would see him, he would literally make a 90-degree turn and walk in a different direction. If I happened to be close, I would see him scramble to get away. About a year ago, so 3 or 4 years after that whole thing happened, I get a random message from a blank profile with the name Paul that said, "Thank you for contributing to my hatred of women." Really? Little old me did all of that? Asshole. Funny thing is, he was at another show I was in with the same company recently, and sat in the front row, slinked all the way down in his chair. Nope, can't see you at all, buddy. I also randomly see him around the city, and it still sends a shiver up my spine. I often wonder if he ever drew me like those other women in his sketches, or what he did to my picture. Yeesh. 30. Long ago, when I had first gotten into college and moved to a new city in a new state because of it, I was approached to help in a haunted house by the activities director at my college. I didn't know the people who were asking for help at their event that well, but it was supposed to be in a huge church that looked like a castle since it was a former monastery, and all proceeds would go to help the various local charities that the church was involved with. I saw it as my chance to meet some new people and make a few friends. Participants were encouraged to come in costume to help with the setup, and to bring about a general festive mood, I decided to go with Harley Quinn, as this was a full decade before the Suicide Squad movie, and I thought it would help me find other geeks in the process to befriend. So I have the pigtails and whatnot, and I arrive to a very large stone building that does indeed look like a castle, and that no one but me, the event coordinators, and one other girl showed up. Side note, I have always looked younger than my age, so I was clocking in at 15 at the oldest in this costume, even though I was well into 19 at the time. The people who approached me were, we'll call them Bob and Sue, along with another girl they were able to find who went to a different college. They said more people would show up later. Spoiler alert, no one did. And we started unloading the cars and bringing things into the church. I very quickly found out that this place was 10% actual service hall and 90% subfloors, towers, and old abandoned classrooms. They had mapped out the whole thing for a medieval-themed guided haunted house tour. They complimented me on my jester, and I shrugged and rolled with it, happy that I had accidentally matched the theme. The first sign of trouble came around 45 minutes after we started setting up the concessions room. I was sent down into one of the lower floors to look for the other girl who hadn't yet come back, after being sent to fetch cupcakes from a fridge in an old kitchen down there. She was named Becca, and was dressed as a fairy princess. So the directions Bob and Sue gave me just barely got me to where I was going. This place was a massive maze on the inside, when I suddenly hear heavy breathing. I stop and peek my head around the corner to see a dude standing in the dimly lighted hall, back to me, looking through a space between two doors into a very bright room beyond. I was having none of this and said in a very clear and overly loud voice, "Can I help you?" This guy spins around like a top and proceeds to stare at me with wide eyes and a gaping mouth. Classic body language for someone who was just caught doing something they shouldn't have been. At that moment, the door behind him starts opening, and he moves behind it, and Becca coming through the door, cupcakes in hand. She looks scared, and in a very fake chipper voice, she says that she needs help carrying all these cupcakes, and that we should really be heading back now. I look behind her as the door closes, and see the creepy guy bolt away down the hall and turn a corner to who knows where. I nod, not wanting to leave her alone, and we go back up to a higher floor. When we get to the room where the concessions were being set up, no one was there, and as Becca sets the cupcakes down, she informs me that there is a lot more downstairs, but she is too scared to go. She says that guy was following her around for a while, ducking behind corners whenever she would turn around. When she got to the kitchen, she had engaged a lock at the top of the door and had stayed in there gathering things and pretending she didn't hear that dude breathing heavy and being a creepazoid. She didn't have a cell phone because her costume, a fairy princess, didn't have pockets. She was ready to cry when she suddenly heard me call the guy out, and decided that now was the time to act, and unlock the door and come out as quickly as she could before I left. Bob and Sue pulled a Houdini and were nowhere to be found in the immediate area, and she said she was too scared to go back downstairs. I told her she should stay up here with the concessions, in the much more brightly lit area, and tell someone as soon as they came back, and that I would go back down to snag the rest of the stuff. I know this sounds like a bad idea, and it was, but that guy was scrawny and looked to be in his 50s and the same height as me, so I was pretty sure I could take him, since I was still pretty tough from constant farm work all through high school. So I headed back down, and this dude tries the same thing with me, following but ducking behind corners every time you turn back around. Not saying anything, but breathing really heavy. I was far more angry than scared at this point, and when I heard him standing outside the kitchen door, like he had done with Becca, I threw the door open as quick as I could, so my face was about an inch from his, and said, "I have the strongest feeling you're not allowed within 500 feet of a skull zone." He was once again very shocked, and before he could answer, I slammed and locked the door. I then proceeded to sing happily and loudly as soon as I heard him scuttle away back into the darkness. I gathered together the soda bottles and boxes of candy bars into a couple of bags to reduce trips, which probably took about 10 minutes, unlocked the door after checking for signs of Creepy McCreeperton, and headed back upstairs. When I got to the concession room and opened the door, Becca was circling the concessions table to be away from, who else, Creepcasso himself. I set the bags down, stood between him and Becca, and said very loudly and in his face, "Back the hell off, Grandpa." He took offense to this, and proceeded to storm out of the room this time, rather than sneak away. As soon as he was gone, Becca started crying, and I told her we needed to go upstairs to find someone, and if we didn't, go home and call the police from there, because this was quickly escalating out of hand for either of us. We head upstairs and see no one, so we head out the door, when who should stop us halfway down the stairs but Sue. She wanted to know why we were leaving, and we told her everything. She said that was impossible, and that they had only left 10 minutes ago, and that was hardly enough time for all of that to have happened. I pointed out that the nearest Costco was easily an hour and a half away, sans traffic, but before she could respond, Bob was behind us on the stairs, saying that he would be glad to take Becca home, but first we had to get the rest of the supplies out of the car. Becca agreed, and I decided to stick around since these people were beyond weird, and I didn't want to leave Becca alone in case they decided to go to a movie or something, and ditch her here with Dr. Creepenstein. We finish unloading the car, and just as we are about to leave, Sue pops back up and says we have to introduce ourselves to the pastor of the church before we go. So we start following her down all these hallways. The whole time she is gushing about this guy like he is an anthropomorphic Bible. We get there, and who should it be but Baron Creepy Creep, now complete with pastor robes. As soon as he sees us, he looks uncomfortable, and is trying not to look at us as Sue is going on and on about this, that, and the other. Then Sue brings up her wild imaginations about a man in the church, and this dude actually straightens up and says that it was him, and he was simply trying to help us. But we kept being disrespectful, and he had to go hide in his office from our terrible and inappropriate behavior. Becca looks as stunned as me, and this dude steps closer to me and asks for my parents' number so he can have a talk with them about raising a child that knows how to respect their elders. I then proceed to snap so hard that I develop a rage-induced Forrest Whitaker eye. First off, I am 19 years old, and I will not be giving some psycho with a god complex and a thing for underage girls any phone number of anyone I care about. Secondly, you're pretty tough in those robes in front of someone who knows you publicly, but we both saw how fast you ran when I caught you spying on my friend through the gap in that door. Like you get good housekeeping lessons from Michael Myers. Thirdly, newsflash. Pigtails and fairy wings are not antennae beaming out a signal for you to follow girls down dark hallways. But hey, it looks like that asthma attack you had the whole time we were alone has magically cleared up. Must be a miracle. At this point, Pastor Creeps-a-Lot looks mortified. I guess he thought I wasn't going to call him on it. Becca looks like she wants to hug me, and Sue looks like she wants to kill me. I mean, she was livid. It was at this point Bob, who I had not noticed come in the room as I was ripping into his pastor, proceeded to slap a hand on my and Becca's shoulders at the same time, and demand we apologize. I slapped his hands away from both of us, told him to fuck right the hell off, grabbed Becca and marched through the halls, out the door and down the street to the bus stop, to downtown, hoping we could figure out the quickest way to get her home from there. We didn't say anything while we waited, but once we were on the bus, she thanked me and pointed out the worst part of this story. That the church was going to have that haunted house still, and that Bob and Sue had told her on the ride over that the pastor was supposed to be a tour guide for the kids, while the parents waited at the concession stand. I was horrified, and said we had to warn people and stop this. She agreed, and said to leave it to her since she had a computer and a bit of clout back at her university. I had neither as I had just moved there, so I left it to her. We found her bus, hugged as she got on, and I never saw her again. What I did get was called into the activities director's office and regaled with a nasty message left by Bob and Sue, stating that I was barred from ever returning to the church, and because of the lies spread about their beloved pastor, Bob and Sue had a terrible turnout at the haunted house, and none of the parents trusted their kids with the pastor anymore. Essentially, we had ruined their Halloween. I recounted what had happened to the activities director, and they said I was obviously making it up, and barred me from future school events for a year. I didn't fight it, since I had a job I was starting in a week, but I will always be grateful to Becca, and wonder what she said and did to save those kids. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to my 5th 30 True Scary Stories special. My word, I kept you waiting a long time for this, didn't I? And I gotta say, it was very difficult to put this together, it really was. But we got there in the end, we got it done. It's not quite as long as the last one, but you know, it should be out over 2 hours, so it should be a good listen anyway, regardless. As per usual, I'll get to work on the next one, but it might take a bit longer to put together. Still, I'm determined that this won't be the last special I do. Though the next feature-length video will probably be at Halloween. Yeah, probably that. But I will get to work on a regular Scary Story special as well. And I'll get it out as soon as I can. Okay, see, what day is this? This is Monday, I think I was planning on putting this up. So if all goes according to plan, you guys should be getting this at some point on the 29th. I was very sensible this time. I didn't kill myself. I didn't stress myself. I recorded the stories over the course of a few weeks. And very glad I did. I meant that everything I think turned out better, because not only did I give myself more time, I was just more relaxed throughout the whole process. I just want to say that while these stories are becoming a bit harder to get my hands on, don't worry, I'm not going to stop doing stories. I just might do these ones a little less frequently. But I should be able to find sources to do other different kinds of stories. Might do more of the retail ones, the confessions of. Maybe I'll slide an extra paranormal in there once a week. We'll see. But I think we should be okay for having regular videos. It just might be a bit more variety than we've usually had. But that might not be a bad thing. People actually seem to be enjoying the different types of videos I'm trying on a Sunday. So I think we should be okay content-wise. Fingers and toes crossed. Well, I would of course like to say super big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I meant to say that earlier, but I want to make sure I get it in before I forget. And this marks, I think it was actually yesterday, let me just double check the date. Yeah, according to my best estimate, the 28th would have been the day, the literal day I officially went full time on YouTube. So that's what this video is in celebration of. I have of course been doing it for longer than a year, but I've been doing it full time for about a year, as of yesterday. And I'll probably be getting myself some kind of a little treat. Might walk over to my local takeaway place. Well, not the local one, but hang on, feeling a bit parched. But there's one fairly nearby that does better food than the one that's closest. The one that's closest isn't that great, so I might get some Chinese takeaway. Chicken chow mein. Yep, I think that's what I'm leaning toward. Got to treat yourself. And with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.